Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I am your host Deepak from India. We are honored to welcome Dr. Jonathan Feinstein, John G. Searle Professor of Economics and Management at Yale School of Management, as our distinguished guest on Businesstalk today. Professor Jonathan Feinstein is a leading thinker on creativity and innovation, exploring how individuals like entrepreneurs, inventors, artists, and scientists develop their creative potential over a lifetime. His work bridges economics, knowledge representation, and the deeply personal paths of creative growth, rooted in the classic principles of individual liberty and freedom. He is the author of two landmark books published by Stanford University Press, The Nature of Creative Development and Creativity in the Large Scale Context, and has been cited by global media, including the BBC. His pioneering course on creativity and innovation gained national attention in Business Week and Fast Company. A PhD from MIT and a BA from Stanford ground his intellectually wide-ranging career, which also spans tax compliance, counterterrorism analysis, and environmental leadership as former director of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. In today's episode, Professor Jonathan Feinstein discusses key insights from his acclaimed book, Creativity in Large-Scale Context, Guiding Creative Engagement and Exploration. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jonathan Feinstein to the conversation. Professor Feinstein, it's a distinct privilege to welcome you to Business Talk. Thank you so much for graciously accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me, Deepak. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Professor Jonathan, the title itself is striking. Creativity in large-scale context. What does large-scale context really mean? And why is it missing piece in how we have traditionally understood creativity?
Context means a lot. It means, first of all, the field that you're working in, the culture that you're working in, that you're living in, but it also means your personal experiences and your personal life path, the journey that you're on. In a sense, context is everything. Everything that you have ever experienced, everything that you have learned, everything that has been done in your field and your culture and your world around you, all of that is part of your context. And your mission, in a sense, is to find your way through to interesting contributions in that context to help yourself and others go even further. So it is indeed very large scale because everything is in that context. I think if you looked at the traditional approach to creativity, especially from the field of psychology, context was not really talked about. It was much more about the individual's going to find some unique idea that suddenly strikes them, and then they develop that idea. And what's missing is this rich environment that they're in, which is in fact the source, you could argue, of the ideas, also the source of some confusion, right? And of some difficulty, because if your context is so huge with everything you've learned, think about the enormous possibilities that you have there. And then the question becomes, how do you choose what to do?
Professor, you introduced a groundbreaking network model of creativity. Can you walk us through this model in simple terms? What is a creative network and how does someone actually navigate one?
Yeah, so there's a couple different parts to the model. Context is modeled as a network. Network just means that different ideas, different people, different places, different works are connected to each other, which makes a lot of sense, of course. And your own network is all the things that you've learned and how they're connected to you. So if you encountered a certain person in the city of London, that person in that city are connected in your network. They might not be connected for other people, but they would be for you. At the same time, within a field, in terms of the knowledge representation, there are topics, there are subtopics, there are particular facts and discoveries, and those form a network as well that would be more generally understood by people in your field. That network is huge, as I said, and so a huge challenge for the person is, what do I want to do here? A lot of the paths I might try to follow would be blind alleys. They won't lead me to a contribution of the nature of what I want. So I need to find my way down a pathway that will ultimately bear fruit and help me make a contribution. So I introduced in this book a way to think about how do you guide yourself in this context. And the gist of the basic idea is you don't just jump all the way to the final answer, the final idea right away. If we look at great creative people, whether it's writers like Virginia Woolf or artists or inventors and designers like Steve Jobs or scientists like Albert Einstein, what we see is they follow a path, a journey. And along that path, initially, they don't know exactly what they want to do, but they form a guiding conception, ultimately, which is kind of like a vision that is saying, this is the general direction I want to head in. I think that here is the place where something interesting is going to turn up for me. I don't know all the details. It's more like a sketch or a vision, as I said. I don't know the details, but it's a starting point for me. And once I have that guiding conception, I can begin to explore it in depth to try to find my way to great contribution. When I started working on creativity and I began to study so many of these individuals, as well as not famous individuals, but people also doing creative work, whether it's artists or scientists, I was amazed to discover this, that they followed these paths and that they formed guiding conceptions often several years before they actually came to the work that they eventually became better known for. And again, the field of psychology, because it tends to focus often on very short-term bursts of insight, because the psychology paradigm in a lot of ways is an experiment, right, where I ask you to create something right now. And that's wonderful, and there are insights from that approach. But this idea of these paths that are unfolding and where somebody would form a guiding conception early on their journey that helps them see where to navigate further down the road, that really was missing.
Professor, you make a powerful distinction between guiding conceptions and guiding principles. How do these two forces work together in practice? And can a creator have one without the other?
When I've studied creative people, I've also been interested to observe that they have both guiding conceptions and guiding principles. Sometimes one of those is more powerful for an individual or a team than the other, but usually they have both. We just talked a bit about the guiding conception. As you begin to follow your path, your journey, at a certain point, you put some elements together enough to say, here's a blueprint, here's a sketch of a plan of where I want to go. And that's a guiding conception. And I love it when I can go to Virginia Woolf's stories or diaries and see right there in front of me a guiding conception she formed, which she did in 1917 when she wrote a story called The Mark on the Wall. And then you could see her over the next 2.5 years exploring how to realize that guiding conception in a new kind of literature, which eventually she did, but it took her quite a bit of experimentation. So I see the guiding conceptions as really launching a phase of experimentation that is directed by that guiding conception. Guiding principles typically come in a little bit later. It depends, but often later. A guiding principle is your sense of how you want things to work out, what aesthetically is a good design, what are some scientific principles that you don't want to give up. And as you begin to work on creative projects, initially from that guiding conception, you may come upon a project, I call them seeds, a seed project that really shows promise. But even to go from a seed project to actually get to the final outcome could be some additional work. A seed project for a chemist, like Hans Krebs in my book, might be an idea for a given reaction to study. He's not sure how that reaction works, but that's his seed project idea. As he began to work on that project, his guiding principles helped him make the right turns instead of the wrong turns, and all those details along the way that you have to work through to get a seed project to actually come through and become a great contribution at the end. And for him, those involved some very standard guiding principles from chemistry, such as the idea uh, catalysis, the idea of efficiency of running experiments, things like that. I'd mention another scientist, Albert Einstein, most famous for the principle of relativity. That is a guiding principle. I think when he started his journey, which was literally a 20-year journey, starting when he was 16, and he hit upon a paradox that he could not figure out, but he expanded that paradox into a guiding conception to see where to look. As he moved along and eventually developed the theory of special relativity, he began to realize more and more that this principle of relativity was really essential. And that became a guiding principle for him, and he was very strict with it, stricter than most other scientists working at the time. And it was his adherence to that principle and not being willing to let it go that really led him eventually, along with some insights, to the general relativity theory. Mentioned also on the inventor side, Steve Jobs, a great designer, of course, our Apple phones we all have. And he had very strong guiding principles, and he was relentless with his team of designers to get them to follow his guiding principle. Guiding principles can also be very creative, even though they happen a little later sometimes, and there are ways to develop the seed project into the final outcome. They can be creative. That extra step, that extra juice at the end to get it to work can itself be creative. There's a story about Steve Jobs. They were working on a design for a computer, and he was not happy with the shape of the base of the computer. And he went out, and one day he went over to the shopping center, and he went into a department store, and he saw a Cuisinart, a kitchen appliance, and he loved the shape of the base of the Cuisinart. So he went back to his team on the Monday, and he said, here's the shape that I want you to use to design this computer. What a great creative connection to make, to link from the world of computers all the way over here to the world of kitchen appliances. He used it creatively, and the people that are really good with their guiding principles, with their experience with them, are very creative. Albert Einstein would be another obvious person who was super creative with that principle of relativity. If I can go one more step with you, in the book, if you care to read it, I present actually the simplest possible model of what we're talking about. And that is, somebody goes along, they've learned a lot of things, some things stand out for them as exciting, and eventually as they're moving along the path, they form a guiding conception. And the guiding conception, once they have it, spawns seed projects. And in the simplest version, a seed project is just two elements that they've linked together now, and they say these two elements as a seed could be developed further. And then they use the guiding principle to find the critical missing piece. You could think of it as like a third element that's somewhere out in their context and they don't know where, but the guiding principle guides them to the third piece, the missing piece. They bring it into the seed, and that completes it as a full project.
Professor, your book argues that creativity is most efficient when it is actively guided rather than left to spontaneous inspiration. Doesn't this challenge the romantic idea of the lone creative genius? And how do you respond to that tension?
Well, there are certainly some lone creative geniuses. We've mentioned a few. There's also very creative companies. NVIDIA is a company I've been studying lately. Very large scale circuit design is something I've studied that's in my book. I don't think it's so much whether it's a person or a team, but it is the case that traditionally creativity was thought about as like a gift from the gods, from the heavens, or just like a spark of insight or genius that suddenly occurs to a few people. I don't believe that. I think everyone can be creative. We have more and more tools to be creative. Computers today, AI, which is its own interesting topic. How does that enter into the world of creativity? I don't think AI is reaching these heights by itself right now, but it's a great complement that people can use. And what I would say is, circling back to the beginning of our conversation, in a very large scale context, which goodness knows we live in today, you can't try everything. If you're just going to randomly try stuff, wait for the spark of genius, you're not gonna find it. There's too many things. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. So you must have some guidance in order to find a direction. Even if you don't know exactly where you're going, it helps point you in a general place where you can search more effectively for what you need. So I think that efficiency is needed. I think creative people have probably used it for centuries. Again, I think the lore of creativity didn't engage with this dimension, this perspective as well. But once we kind of recognize the perspective, I think we see the value. Should mention as well, really value for managers and leaders in organizations to help their teams think about what is your guiding conception. And if you don't have one, we need to work on one. What are your guiding principles? A team, an organization should be able to articulate those guiding principles, and that helps keep everyone on the same page, moving in the same direction towards a great outcome.
Professor, you draw on fascinating case studies. Virginia Woolf, Albert Einstein, Clifford Forsham, Lynn Conway, and Jack Dorsey. What was the common thread of guided creativity you found across such vastly different fields and life experiences?
I love to study creative people in all walks of life and all fields. It's fascinating. And I've been doing that for literally 25 to 30 years, probably. And what I've discovered along the way is that every human being follows a life journey. And if you're doing any kind of creative work, which could just be you're concocting new recipes in your home kitchen or your garden, or it could be you're contributing creatively to your organization, or it could be you're an entrepreneur, or it could be you're a writer like Virginia Woolf or a scientist like Albert Einstein. Whatever your journey is, it turns out there's a lot of these commonalities to the way those journeys unfold for people that I don't want to disrespect or not recognize the huge differences, because every person has their own unique journey. But we can identify some common elements that are really useful to help people think about what their journey might look like. And to me, as I looked across these people and I began to recognize those common elements, that was really the exciting moment. And then I think it became for me, how do I model that in the most efficient, most effective way that most clearly depicts that world that I'm seeing in front of me?
Professor, the book suggests that large-scale creative contexts can be mined. What does that process of mining look like for a business team or organization trying to innovate? Where do they even begin?
Yeah, well, that's all about mining means you got to find the right field in which to mine, and that's all about the guiding conception. So I think organizations have to be, and they are, working with their teams, their divisions, to think about our guiding conception for where we're going to go next. I love the story of early companies like Apple or NVIDIA and lots of others, or Google, where we see at the early phases of the founders that first guiding conception that is so fascinating. And then it evolves over time. So I think I would also tell organizations you need a guiding conception, but you have to be flexible and allow it to evolve over time as you discover new things. That's what keeps an organization alive and moving forward. We know that's a big challenge for many organizations. I think that's about allowing that evolution of the guiding conception to take place. Virginia Woolf, as an example, had the guiding conception in her short story, The Mark on the Wall. 2.5 years later, she wrote another short story. And as she completed that, she realized how she could advance her guiding conception, adding additional elements, and that guided her to the guiding conception that really unleashed her great modernist literary work.
Professor, you mentioned that randomly trying different creative approaches simply doesn't work in large-scale context because the options are overwhelming. What does a smarter, more systematic approach look like for a first-time creative leader?
Well, you can think about what it looks like for many different people, from a first-time creative, for somebody using AI, for a large organization. I think for a first-time creative person, you really want to step back inside yourself, kind of like a mind map, and recognize the vastness of the context you have, and then begin to have conversations, begin to extend out. And what you're really looking for in the work I'm doing now, which is building on the book for what I hope may eventually be another book, but we'll see. Certain elements stand out for people. As you're talking to people, as you're thinking about your field, something might come into your head as well. That looks exciting, or that has promise, or that's an opportunity. I think of those as salient elements, SALIENT. salient elements that stand out for you. Pick those out. And I think as you begin to see what those are, where the excitement is for you, eventually a couple of those will come together and then you'll form the guiding conception. So you don't want to be overwhelmed by the large scale context, which I think can happen. I think you want to realize you don't need to jump to the final answer today. One of the ideas with the guiding conception that I work on with students is relax. It's like a daydream. It's like step back. What's exciting to you? What's an opportunity? Don't think you have to have all the answers now. Just begin to think about what's exciting. And as your guiding conception begins to formulate, then you'll have time to explore it and find your way forward. And there'll be many steps along the road, as we know, many more than people often anticipate when they start the journey. And that's okay. Guiding principles will play a huge role in that in keeping you on the right path. And just be prepared for some of those evolving steps to get to the final result.
Professor, you link economics with knowledge representation in your theoretical framework. How does an economics lens uniquely enrich our understanding of the creative process, something a psychologist or artist might miss?
I do think it's a different perspective. I think it's a perspective from economics, from social science, and from mathematical and computational modeling, I would say. And I think what it brings that's different is a very structured modeling approach. I'm a big believer in structuring our thinking. Our thinking is sometimes a little fuzzy, and that's okay. That's part of the creative process. But if we're trying to actually depict the creative process so other people can understand it, we would like to be as precise as we can be about what is actually happening. And so I think I've brought into this world that kind of thinking, that kind of background, and it really helps me articulate models that may not have been there before.
Professor, in your Yale lectures, you have noted that AI tools rush to completion, potentially shortcutting the important space of partially formed ideas. How should creative teams use AI without losing the depth of the creative development process?
Yeah, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think especially novice, sort of inexperienced people doing creative work, whether it's entrepreneurship or artists or scientists or whatever it might be, there's a tendency to be impatient and want the great idea right now. I want it today. I want it tomorrow. But what I've learned is creativity doesn't really work that way. It's an unfolding process. And I think right when you start, buckle up and recognize and accept this is going to be a journey. This is going to be a process. And I'm going to enjoy the ride, enjoy the process to get me where I want to get to. And I think more experienced people not only understand that better, they actually get faster at the journey, at the process, not surprisingly, because they understand a little better what steps to go through. But a novice person, like a student who's just starting, maybe trying to start a company, and I've talked to many, we just did an article in our Yale SOM Insights magazine about two of our entrepreneurs, and one of them in particular, Mboko from Africa, they've gone through many, many steps in the healthcare delivery system they're working out. It was interesting to see all the steps they've had to encounter and overcome. So to me, it's about having the right mindset when you start, and then you'll be more comfortable going through the journey. But at the same time, have your checkpoints. Do I have a guiding conception? Do I need to evolve it or change it? Have I developed guiding principles that will work for me? And then, of course, there's things like, do I have the team that I need around me? Do I have the time and the resources I need? Many dimensions to the problem. It's more complex, I think, than people sometimes recognize it to be.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. Your research work has explored how creative individuals, entrepreneurs, scientists, and artists develop over years or even a lifetime. What is the single most important piece of guidance you would offer to someone who feels they haven't yet found their creative voice?
Actually, I want to give you two answers if it's okay, because one thing I didn't say in our conversation that's important to say is ultimately, when someone makes a contribution to our world, whatever that means, it's really a confluence of two things coming together: the field and the opportunities and possibilities in their environment, and their own personal journey and personal experience is also part of their context. And when those two things come together, that's the contribution, the personal experience, the personal life journey with the field, the context, the opportunities at that time. That's how I think about it. I think that's a very powerful way to think about creative contribution. The advice I give, other than understanding that that's the journey you're on, is you got to believe in yourself. You can't give up. Be flexible. Allow for the twists and turns, but keep going.
Professor Feinstein, as we close today's conversation, I am reminded that the greatest gift of your work is the belief it instills. That each of us in our own context has the capacity to engage creatively with our world around us. Your network model is not just as an academic framework. It is a compass for every innovator, entrepreneur, and thinker navigating complexity. Thank you for bringing that clarity on Businesstalk and for generously sharing your wisdom with our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.